This was a while back. My husband decided to surprise me with a Valentine's Day suite to a secluded treehouse resort in the upper Ozark Mountains. On paper, it sounded extremely romantic, a getaway for just the two of us with no distractions. I knew he was probably going to try to get frisky as well, 'cause hey, it's Valentine's, so I wore something revealing and teased the whole drive up there. Unfortunately for us, you could say that the brochure lied. The treehouse looked nothing the way it was shown online. Instead of the sprawling multi-tiered bungalow that spanned the tops of cedars, we basically got a rickety house on stilts. James was furious, and I was upset too, but we had already paid the deposit, and it's not like we could just cancel and go. This was a lot of money down the drain. Needless to say, it made the start of our getaway a bit of a downer. Then as we got into the small room, I noticed that it was beginning to storm. "Should we worry about this place falling down or something?" I asked. I didn't want to be pessimistic, but it was easy to imagine this entire building collapsing because of a gentle breeze. Every time we walked, the whole thing kind of shook. We should probably stay close to the door just in case," he suggested. Even though things were pretty bad, I still wanted to try and get the best of our time together. After all, it wasn't just about the place. I wanted to really be with him, too. "Let's get into the hot tub," I suggested. James didn't object and got the water running, but it seemed like it took forever for it to get hot, and then it only stayed hot for a few minutes. It was very disappointing, to say the least. "Well, let's just go get a bottle of wine," he suggested instead. I didn't feel like arguing, a bit more frustrated now that everything was turning into a disaster, so he ran out to the car in the pouring rain and brought back a bottle of Chardonnay and a corkscrew bottle opener. "You look sexy drenched," I teased him. He went to the kitchen cabinet and got out 2 wine glasses, pouring us some before offering a toast to making better memories. As we started to drink it, I had this weird vibe, or I guess a premonition, so to speak. I was thinking it would be crazy if James somehow had bit the glass and the wine shards would disperse into his mouth and cut him. A few seconds later, that was exactly what happened. He was taking another sip from his glass when this thing abruptly shattered in his mouth and he started to choke. I felt the whole room was moving in slow motion. I panicked and moved to hit his back, hoping he would choke it up. Then I asked if he wanted me to call 911. He shook at his head negatively and kept struggling to vomit up the blood. Silently, he gestured to help him into the bathroom, where he used his toothbrush to cause himself to gag. I stood there, holding up as shards of glass fell into the toilet. After that little ordeal, we cuddled up in bed and really didn't say much to each other. Honestly, I was starting to think this treehouse was haunted or something. And finally, James made the suggestion that we should go get some food and called around local places to see who would deliver. By this point, the storm had gotten so bad every time the wind shifted our whole cliff house and it felt like it was actually shaking. It was frightening, but I was trying to find the positive in this insane situation. It truly wasn't easy, especially after that choking incident. "Looks like we'll have to do pizza," James announced after calling 15 places, and you could tell his voice was really hoarse from that experience. It certainly wasn't as bad as it could be, I suppose. I didn't really care because by that point I was just starving and could probably eat anything. "It sounds great," I lied. And the driver claimed it would be there in 40 minutes, so we grabbed a shower while we waited. For a moment, it was nice to just forget about all the bad stuff that we had gone through. When the driver arrived to drop off our food, I was the one that answered the door. Not sure why I didn't bother to get dressed. I didn't see it as important, I guess. He was a younger guy, probably in his mid-20s, and likely hadn't really been around women the way he was ogling me. And I wasn't even really wearing anything that revealing, to be honest. How much?" I said when he seemed to forget why I had even come there. He stammered off the total price and gave us the pizza. My wallet's in the car. 1 second," James said, running toward our vehicle. The pizza guy followed. I was standing there holding the pizza box, watching them both out of the corner of my eye when I saw something strange happen. It looked like the driver had possibly hit James on the back of the head with something. and I later found out it was a tire iron because it had caused my husband to fall unconscious in less than a few seconds. It's hard for me to really properly describe that moment of terror. I knew what was happening, but I still couldn't believe it. This young kid marched back up to me as I stood there, transfixed and paralyzed, holding the pizza box. He had a knife in his hand that looked like it could easily slit my throat, and he demanded that I get on the bed and tie myself up. I climbed on the mattress as he instructed and did my best not to cry. I was sure this kid was about to have his way with me. He demanded that I use the bed sheets to tie up my hands and legs, and I was blubbering like a baby, telling him where my wallet was. Just take it and go. We won't call the cops, I swear," I told him. I didn't want him to hurt me, and it honestly felt like if I had said one wrong thing, this kid was going to snap. This definitely felt like a crime of opportunity. He was nervous and skittish, and was constantly waving the knife around as a threat as I finished up the bonds in my hands. I made sure that my feet were loose enough that I could still fight in case he had any other ideas. Then he took my wallet back to his car and returned with his smartphone. He started to video me. I don't know if it was for his own sick pleasure or what, but I was just too terrified to really say anything unless prompted. A few times he spit on me. Finally, he decided that he'd had his fun and left before my husband finally came to. I sat there tied up on the bed for a good 30 minutes before James came stumbling into the room, looking frantic and confused by what had just happened. We called the cops immediately, but would you believe they didn't even bother to send anyone that night? Instead, we basically got no sleep because I was sure that Psycho would come back. I attended to James's wounds and did my best not to think about the fact that we were basically stranded up here in the mountains with no money. James insisted that it was going to be all right, but I was having a really hard time seeing the positive to any of this. In the AM, the cops finally came by the resort and wrote down everything we had told them, and we both did our best to provide a description of the driver and of his car. It really helped me to realize that I have a terrible memory because, for the life of me, I could only remember 2 or 3 things about this kid. He was white, he wore a baseball cap, and he had a southern accent, not exactly helpful. But the officers promised that they would keep us informed on any developments, and we were supposed to stay there another day and night without any protection. I know it's crazy to think that this psychopath might come back, but I told James that I didn't want to risk it. I don't care about the deposit. I just want to go home. And he agreed. He had already told his mother about what had happened over the Valentines, and she wired some money to his PayPal so we could afford some gas. On the way back home, I was busy calling and canceling credit cards and trying my best to forget about the whole thing. James instead insisted that we both go take self-defense courses, which I was not totally against. It just made me realize that he had been just as scared as me that day. A few months later, after a lot of back-and-forth hassle with the company, we did actually get most of our money back. They admitted in their email that it wasn't the first time their customers had reported suspicious activity on the property. Next time we plan a vacation, I'm picking, I teased James. It's crazy how we kind of laugh about it now all these years later, but dear God, if things had gone differently, I'm honestly not even sure I'd be here today. My 2020 Valentine's was a little different because my family had to move in early February, so we postponed actual Valentine's until close to March. Then the pandemic hit, and I was one of the first in our family to be exposed. My boyfriend said that we could still do our Valentines over Zoom, so we agreed to the next weekend. Honestly, I felt like one of those kids stuck in a bubble constantly. It was mind-numbing to see others going outside, and I couldn't. I didn't have any symptoms. I didn't understand why I was being locked away like some kind of criminal. Still, my boyfriend Robbie told me that he was going to make Valentine's special and insisted that we couldn't miss it, no matter the circumstances. Saturday rolled around, and as planned, I logged into Zoom, eager for the romantic surprise that he was going to pull off. Honestly, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I doubt it was like anything he originally intended. He had his camera set up right at an angle where I could see him in his entire room, 2 windows that were partially open to let in a breeze as he wore a silly blue suede shirt and matching tie. He had candles going and soft jazzy music playing. It was cheesy, so I couldn't help but laugh and giggle. Just trying to set the mood, he teased. Oh, so sexy, I told him, trying not to roll my eyes. Next, he waved a bouquet of flowers in front of the camera and said, "Roses, your favorite. Don't they smell good?" And that joke was actually in poor taste because thanks to COVID, my sense of smell was completely gone for a little while. "Chocolates for you," he said next, waving a box of filled creamy chocolates near the screen. Then there was a strange noise right outside his window, like a scream, and he told me to hold on. I stopped and waited as he got up and looked out the window, and immediately noticed that panic was gripping his body. He ran past the camera and I heard him go down a flight of stairs. Next thing I knew, I heard more shouting from his open window. He sounded like he was having an argument with someone. Admittedly, my mind was frantically trying to figure out what was going on, and I kept shouting his name, hoping he would get back inside. It actually took him almost half an hour to do so, and I nearly called the cops myself. When he got back on camera, I wished that I had. Robbie had a bloody nose and a black eye, and I immediately asked what happened. "Someone just stole my car," he told me. I'm really sorry, I gotta go," he said. I didn't hear from him until the next day, and the cops found his car parked not far from where I live. According to them, the thief had activated the GPS and gone to the last location Robbie had put it. I suspected that maybe they intended to rob me next. The cops said they found traces of gunpowder residue in the car as though they had been carrying a recently discharged weapon. Robbie confirmed that they had shot at him when he tried to stop them, and that just made my heart sink even more. I didn't even hear the pop go off. I'm not sure why at the last second they decided to just abandon the car, but Robbie admitted to me a month later that he thinks he knew why they stole it in the first place. "I got you a promise ring, and it was pretty expensive. I don't know why I didn't think to bring it inside, but I left it in the passenger side seat. I think that must have been what they were after," he admitted. It truly was the most and least romantic Valentine's I'd ever had.
It was a week before Valentine's Day, and junior high school was running along slowly as usual. We were beginning to prep for our cheesy little Valentine's Day thing. Our school's locker had those little vent slits in the door, and every year in between second and third period, the school would give everyone an extra half hour to slide those lame Valentine's cards into people's lockers. I never actually participated in handing out cards, but I still decorated my locker with my name, like most everyone else. That's because people often gave candy bars. I'm talking full-size candy bars, and I didn't want to miss out on that aspect of it. So, before the big day, I sat quietly at my first period desk, and I created the most half-assed name card to tape to my locker. And when the big day did come, I waited to see which fish I would catch. And by fish, I meant secret crushes who had some chocolate to give. On Valentine's Day, after fourth period when the lunch bell rang, I decided to stop by my locker to take a look at the diabetic bounty. But there was only one thing in there, and it wasn't sugar. Inside, there was a folded up piece of notebook paper. It looked like it had been torn from a journal, and there was red lipstick on the upward-facing flap. I was immediately disappointed, but my curiosity had me opening up the sliver of paper before I even knew what I was doing. As I held it, a girl walking by stopped and gasped, and then she just kept walking. This was awkward and weird, but I thought nothing more of it at the moment. I looked down at the simple message scrawled on the note. It said, "Low Water Bridge, 10 p.m. It's been a while." That was it. No name or signature, no X's or O's. If whoever this was really thought I'd go alone to that old bridge at night, they were crazy. I mean, for all I knew, the janitor threw this in my locker, and he was planning to do something very illegal to me. I almost threw it away, but not before showing it to my friend Ethan. Ethan took one look at it, and he made the same face that that girl had made when she walked by my locker. "What? Do you know something about this?" I asked. I was confused. "Maybe," he smiled. He looked conniving. Ethan was the kind of person who was never not joking. "I'll let you in on it if you take me with you." Screw that mess, man. That's how people get killed. I couldn't believe he wanted me to go out there. "Trust me, you're not going to get hurt or anything," he said, seemingly worried that I might refuse still. "I'll even bring my dad's gun. Dude, we have to go." "And when I get shoved into a pedophile's van?" I remained adamant. He thought it over for a moment, and finally he rolled his eyes and replied, "I'll pay you $100. I'll protect you and pay you. I'm that sure about this. I gotta see something." By now my curiosity was overflowing, so I gave in. "Fine," I looked straight at him, "but I swear to God, if this is a prank or something, I'm going to throw you over that bridge." After school at about 9 p.m. that night, I told my parents I was tired and that I was heading to bed early. I walked to my room, locked the door, and climbed out of my window. I made my way over to Ethan's house. His place was only a few blocks from mine. Then we headed together to Low-Water Bridge. Now, Low-Water Bridge was a local old bridge that didn't serve much of a purpose anymore. Back in the day, it carried people over a deep creek. But now, there was literally no water under it. It had dried up. Even when it rained, all that would flow below it was a 2-inch deep stream. Hence the name Low-Water Bridge. Besides, no one ever even drove over the thing. Everyone was so afraid that the bridge would collapse, even if they walked on it. It took us 45 minutes to walk there. The hardest part was hiding in the bushes whenever we saw a car coming. It was so close to curfew, someone would definitely suspect something, or knowing my luck, it would be a cop and we'd be totally screwed. Luckily though, no one saw us. We made it to Low-Water Bridge without too much of a hassle. Once there, we waited in some nearby brush. The wooden bridge looked so dilapidated. I was surprised that it could even support itself, let alone the air above it. As we waited for 10 p.m. to come, Ethan seemed to be acting strange. He was quickly looking over his shoulders, and his eyes were so wide. At one point, he jumped when some small animal moved about in the woods next to us. "What's up with you?" I whispered. It's nothing, man. Just keep your eyes on the bridge." He sounded so anxious. Soon enough, it was 10. I stood up, stretching my tired legs after squatting for 10 minutes straight. Before I walked over to the bridge, I turned back to Ethan and I asked, "You will be watching me the whole time, right?" "Yes, dude, I promise." He was so serious now, not like he was at school. I actually believed him. Now I was beginning to get nervous. I started walking, trying to tread softly so that I could hear any and all noises around me in case there was any funny business. But it was quiet, unnaturally quiet. In between the slight crunches of gravel underfoot, all I could hear was my own breathing. Eventually, I came to the edge of the bridge. I didn't step onto it yet. I didn't really feel like dying today. I turned to where Ethan was, and he raised himself over the brush. He was making hand gestures toward me. He wanted me to step onto the bridge. I swallowed hard and continued. The first step made the wood underneath me creak, and it echoed throughout the woods around us. It was terrifying. It felt like it took ages to reach the middle, but the moment I did, I stopped and I listened. It was no longer silent. There was a very faint sound in the air. It was rhythmic and high-pitched. It got louder by the second, until soon I could make a guess at the noise. It sounded like a young girl humming a tune. I had no idea what tune it was, and that didn't really matter at the time. It sounded like someone was coming, but the humming itself seemed to be coming from every direction at once. I was beginning to panic. I turned to Ethan, silently asking him permission to get off the bridge. But when I saw his face from the bushes, my heart sank. His eyes were wide, and his mouth was open. And then I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I was done. I ran from that spot, not even stopping to grab Ethan, but thankfully he ran as soon as I did. We did not stop until we got to my house, where we literally collapsed from exhaustion. We were on my front lawn on our backs, trying to catch our breaths for the next 10 minutes. When we could finally speak, I asked him, "What the heck was that? Who was behind me? Did I almost get kidnapped?" He stared back at me with the widest eyes. No. It was nothing like that, man. So it's all true," he said to himself. "What? What's true? You said you'd tell me if I went with you. What's this all about?" I was desperate for an answer. Then he explained it to me. Apparently, it was a local urban legend. Every year, someone would get a note in their locker on Valentine's Day. On it, there would be red lipstick and a message to go to the low water bridge later that night. No one ever did it though, so a lot of people believed it was just a prank and they would throw the note away. The story goes, it all started in the 1980s when a certain girl attended our school. Nobody knows her name, so we all call her Lisa Black. She was a troubled girl who was bullied by her peers. On a cold February 14th, she jumped over Low Water Bridge, which at that time had deep flowing waters beneath it, and she drowned. Ever since then, every Valentine's Day, someone would receive that note in their locker. That note with a request and a red lipstick stain. Personally, I'm not sure if I even believe that story. I don't know how I didn't hear it the other 2 years I'd been there. I mean, it could have all been a prank that was never revealed to me. But what I can't explain, though, was the sound of the humming that came from every direction, and the look on Ethan's face of sheer terror. After all, I had never seen Ethan so serious before in my life. This started when I was in middle school. I was 12 at the time, so having a Valentine was everything to me. I was a social kid, and I liked this boy. We'll call him Kenneth. And honestly, I thought he liked me back. Every day of that February after lunch, there were little notes that someone put in my locker. I thought it was weird because his locker was far from mine. But I was a daydreamer. I just thought that he liked me back, that he liked me enough that he would leave notes for me. The day before Valentine's, a kid that was very skinny and was wearing a black hood with a Lions logo stood in front of my locker, blocking me from it. "Hi," he said, shivering. "Would you like to go on a date?" I had never seen this guy before. I was trying to see how awkward it would be if we were on a date, and we didn't know what to talk about. "Sorry, I have plans," I said, and I walked away. It was really weird. Later, I was walking home, and I stopped to get something from Target. I was looking at some candy bars when I noticed someone that was as tall as me. He had this hood, with a Lions logo on it. I left with the candy bar, and I started to make my way home. I called my mom to tell her that I was going to be late. There was a shortcut that was an abandoned train station. I would only take it when I was going to be late. As I was walking, a bush next to me started to move. And I don't know why, but after what I saw at the store, I freaked out, and I ran the rest of the way home. When I finally got home, I got out my phone and I saw a text. It was from an unknown number. There were pictures of me running and me walking around the store. I immediately showed them to my mom, and she simply said it was probably friends. Friends or not, that's simply creepy. The next day I showed my friends the number. They looked at the number and said, That's the weird kid's number. I know because he gave it to me and I never texted him." This really freaked me out. I still see him around the school, but when I do, I'll glare at him, and I try to keep my distance. For this story, I will need to tell you a bit of background information. I am 6 feet tall, 16 years old, and I live in a very small country named Latvia. Probably some of you know it. I have shared this story only with close friends, other family members, and my parents. We live in a 2-story house, and my room is on the 2nd floor. My parents often leave me home alone because they travel a lot for work things. This happened on Valentine's Day 2015. It was a cold winter night, and I had just broken up with my girlfriend, so I was completely alone to watch the house. It was around 8 that night. I was downstairs watching TV shows on Netflix when I heard a light knocking on my living room door. I got up to look outside, and there was no one there. After an hour or so, I heard the tapping again. I peeked outside, only to see someone running by the bush where the road leads to another street. I thought someone was pranking me, so I didn't really care too much. After a half hour of watching TV shows, I got bored, so I asked my friend to come over. He lived about 5 minutes away from where I live. For safety purposes, I'll call him Jake. Jake was shorter than me and a year younger. He came over and we played some video games. After a while, I needed to go pee, so I went upstairs to use the bathroom. When I got back to the living room, Jake told me he heard tapping on the window. I wasn't surprised, and I told him before he got here I heard the tapping too. 1 hour passed, and then we heard the tapping coming again, and we ignored it. After about 3 minutes, we heard footsteps upstairs, and that's when things got serious. We muted the game. The footsteps stopped. We thought the footsteps were in the game, so we continued to play, trying to listen at the same time. Then we heard something heavy fall upstairs in my parents' bedroom. I paused the game and me and Jake went upstairs. We checked every room. We checked my parents' last. I peeked inside the room and saw nothing. It was pitch black, and I turned on the light and went into the room with Jake behind me. Jake checked the closet and I checked everywhere else. As we were leaving the room, I forgot that we did not check under the bed, so I hesitantly asked Jake if he could just quickly look. He walked over slowly, obviously a bit anxious. He looked under the bed, and he jumped up faster than I've ever seen him get up. He bolted out of the room without saying a word, and I quickly turned off the light and slammed the door shut. Jake was already downstairs. I rushed down there to him, and he was pale as snow. I asked him what was wrong, and his answer made my heart sink. He said there was someone under the bed, smiling with eyes wide open. We rushed outside and called the police. We hid behind a bush that was in front of my home. As I was on the line with the police officer, Jake and I saw my parents' bedroom light come on. I asked them to come over as fast as they possibly could. We watched the house for about 10 minutes, but we saw no movement inside. When police finally arrived, 2 officers went to search the house, and the 3rd officer asked a couple of questions. After a moment, the 2 police officers came out of the house with a middle-aged man. He had a long beard with wide, bloodshot eyes. His face was full of scars and bruises. Now I get why Jake looked so pale. One of the police officers told us that the man had a knife hidden in one of his pockets. He had broken in by an unlocked bedroom window, but how on earth did he get up to the 2nd floor? I have no idea. The police called my family, who said they'd be back in town as soon as they possibly could. Nothing like that has happened since that day, but I still get goosebumps thinking about and writing this, because it sounds like, even if I didn't invite Jake over, I still wouldn't have spent Valentine's Day alone.
So this happened about a year ago. I know it because it was around Valentine's Day and I'd spend the week leading up to it just dreading it, stalking my ex on Instagram, and generally just felt pretty terrible about myself. We'd split up a few months earlier and she kept the flat we'd lived in, seeing as she did most of the work finding it. Her friend moved in and I moved out. It was a simple but painful arrangement. I ended up finding a flat for myself way out, on pretty much the outskirts of the city. I don't know if you've ever been to London, but flat prices are stupidly high, and if you want anywhere that's more than just a bed and a toilet, you have to abandon any hope of living remotely central. So the Valentine's Day season came around, and one weekend I was feeling fairly sorry for myself, working my way through a bottle of Prosecco. I should have really been sharing when I made the decision. I changed the radius on all my dating apps to be as small as possible, and tried to see if I could get a Valentine's date lined up. Half the time you matched with someone and they'd reveal that they were on the other side of London to you, and your attempt to organize a drink would fall through. "It's too far," or "I don't have time tonight, maybe next week," were phrases you'd hear all the time. So, I'm not the most attractive guy. I think I'm honest enough with myself to say that, and I have a pretty good gauge of when someone I've matched with seems too hot to be real. Usually my hunches confirm when they send me a message advertising some Russian dating site in the first minute. Anyway, I meet Becca, who seems lovely, and very much in my league, and who lives actually not too far from me. We agree to go for a drink at the Crown the day before Valentine's Day, so as not to have the awkward expectation of anything extra romantic, which is pretty much the local for anyone who lives near my overground stop. and I'm pretty excited to be honest. She seems pretty funny. Maybe not wife material, but we get along, and for a while the thought of my ex off on her own Valentine's Day seems a lot less unpleasant. So, date night comes, and I have my usual beer or two before for a bit of Dutch courage and head off to the Crown. I send her a message to let her know that I'm on the way, and she says cool, she's almost there. It's a little dark out, and there's a thin mist of rain, but I shrug it off. It is London after all. The walk to the pub doesn't usually take too long. You have to navigate loads of little back streets that ends up slowing you down a whole bunch, and I spend a little extra time to avoid some alleyways, just because I've heard stories about people getting mugged around here. But I arrive to the Crown only a bit late, and send her a message apologizing as I get in. She replies pretty quickly, instantly almost. "Shoot," she says, "didn't get a chance to message you. There's a bunch of guys in there for someone's birthday, and they're being really rowdy, making me a little uncomfortable. I've nipped over to a restaurant down the road to see if they might have space for us." I mean, she's not wrong. There are a bunch of guys in here being loud and obnoxious, and I guess if you were a small woman, it would make you pretty uncomfortable. Not only that, but a group are smoking outside and jeering, and I could see how you wouldn't want to hang around outside for long. She sends me the restaurant's name and tells me to hurry. They'll save a table for us if I'm quick. This is where I get a little concerned. We never agreed to dinner. Not only that, but when I put in Google Maps, the location gives me 2 routes. One is pretty quick, and the other adds an extra 10 minutes onto your walk time, easy. The only issue is the shorter route goes right through this old estate that's semi-abandoned. I say semi because although I'm sure people live there, I'm not sure who, and half the buildings are boarded up. I take one look at it and decide that there's no way I'm going through there. There are barely any streetlights, if any, and I can barely make out much more than a few dark shapes. I decide to take the longer way around and apologize to her, but let her know that I'll be a little later. She replies instantly again and tells me that I need to come now and that I should just be as quick as possible. I don't like her tone and tell her there's no way I'm walking through the old estate at night. Now I'm beginning to feel really uncomfortable and am aware of how alone I am on this route. Whilst it passes by several houses and shops, there's no one actually on the street itself. There aren't many people out on the night before Valentine's Day, and come to think of it, I've got no idea why the restaurant would be so full in the first place. I get that funny feeling in my stomach where you know something's wrong but can't quite put your finger on it. And for some reason, I walk in the middle of the road for the last stretch. I think maybe I felt a little safer there, or at least in my head I think I'd be able to see anyone who came towards me. Thankfully, no one did. I did manage to freak myself out a little, catching my reflection in shop fronts and car windows, and have to make a conscious effort to not look at them because I know I'll only freak myself out more. I'd have turned right around, but I realized that I was actually closer to the restaurant than the original pub, and at this point I just wanted to see another friendly human face. I sped up my walking slightly, made sure to text a couple of friends just to be safe. All this time I'm walking, she's messaging me telling me just to hurry up and that the shortcut's fine. She literally just took it. But as soon as I mention I'm almost at the restaurant, she stops replying. Just like that. One moment she's telling me to hurry, and the next, as soon as it's clear I'm not going to use the shortcut at all, she's gone. Well, they're gone, I suppose. No way of knowing who it was. I get inside, and like I suspected, the place is fairly empty. It's definitely not booked out, and when I ask if the waiter's seen any woman like Becca asking about a table, he shakes his head. Not tonight, he tells me. Only a couple of families and an older couple. I think about texting whoever was claiming to be Becca, but even opening the conversation gives me the creeps. The idea that there's a couple of days' worth of chatting there, of whomever was on the other end pretending for whatever reason to be a normal person, gives me the chills. It's strangely weirder to think of someone that creepy pretending to be normal in a weird way. I think about walking back using the road, but I realize, looking out the window of the restaurant, that whoever was pretending to be Becca knows my exact location. They'll know I arrived and found out they were lying. I think about the fact that they might be watching me from somewhere, my silhouette in the window, and I ask if I can have a table whilst I order an Uber home. Even during the ride home, I hate the idea of my face near the window, and I try to lean into the middle seat. I get the driver to drop me as close as possible to my house, and my heart races the whole walk home. I never told them my address exactly, but the idea that they know the area I live in is enough to make me start looking at flats on the other side of the city. I think, as soon as I can, I'm going to move.